For decades, the textbooks taught a simple story. First came farming, then came villages, then came temples. Civilization was a ladder, and each rung depended on the one below. Then they found Göbekli Tepe, 11,500 years old, monumental stone pillars weighing up to 10 tons, carved by people who hadn't invented agriculture, pottery, or metal tools. The oldest known monumental architecture on Earth, built before Stonehenge by 6,000 years, before the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000, by hunter-gatherers who, according to every model of human development, shouldn't have been capable of this. So who built it? The internet says Atlanteans, ancient aliens, a lost advanced civilization. The conspiracy industry turned Göbekli Tepe into a blank screen for every theory mainstream archaeology had rejected. But ancient DNA from the region has now answered the question. And the answer is more revolutionary than any conspiracy, because the builders were local, ordinary, and they were the ancestors of nearly every farmer who would colonize Europe. The genetic picture comes from multiple studies spanning a decade. Lazaridis and colleagues in 2016, Feldman and colleagues in 2019, and the landmark Lazaridis study in Science in 2022, which sequenced over 700 ancient genomes from the Near East and surrounding regions. The DNA didn't come from Göbekli Tepe itself. Ancient DNA preservation in the warm Near Eastern climate is poor, and the site's ritual context left few suitable human remains. But it came from contemporary populations across the Fertile Crescent, living in the same period and the same genetic world. The builders weren't outsiders. They were the indigenous population of the region, and their genetic signature would become the most influential ancestry component in Western history. The first piece of evidence is the ancestry of the builders themselves, and it introduces a genetic component that changed everything. Every ancient genome from the pre-pottery Neolithic Fertile Crescent carries a distinctive ancestry component that geneticists call basal Eurasian. It is a deep lineage that split from the ancestors of all other non-African populations before those populations diverged from each other. No modern population carries pure basal Eurasian ancestry, but the people who built Göbekli Tepe carried it at high levels, mixed with local Anatolian hunter-gatherer lineages that had been in the region for tens of thousands of years. This wasn't a mysterious foreign population. This was the local genetic landscape of the Near East, a population deep in place, shaped by tens of thousands of years of residence in the region that would become the cradle of agriculture. The second piece of evidence is what happened next. Because the builders didn't disappear. The DNA shows remarkable genetic continuity in southeastern Anatolia from the pre-pottery Neolithic through the pottery Neolithic and into the Chalcolithic period. The builders of Göbekli Tepe and the first farmers of the region were the same genetic population. The transition from hunting and gathering to farming wasn't a population replacement in this region. It was a cultural transformation by people who stayed in place. They didn't need outsiders to teach them agriculture. They invented it themselves. Feldman and colleagues demonstrated in 2019 that the Neolithic transition in the Fertile Crescent involved minimal genetic input from outside populations. The same people who hunted gazelle at Göbekli Tepe's founding were the grandparents of the people who planted the first wheat fields. No migration, no replacement, no lost civilization arriving with knowledge. Just local people in place for millennia who changed how they lived without changing who they were. The third piece of evidence follows these people outward. Because they didn't stay in Anatolia. Starting around 7000 BCE, descendants of the Göbekli Tepe builders began migrating into Europe. They carried their farming technology, their domestic crops, their animals, and their DNA. The Anatolian Neolithic farmer expansion is the most significant demographic event in European prehistory. It contributed approximately 20 to 30% of modern European ancestry, varying by region, higher in southern Europe, lower in the north. Fitzy, the Iceman, 92% Anatolian farmer. The Neolithic builders of Stonehenge's first phase, predominantly Anatolian farmer. The early farming communities of Greece, Italy, Spain, Germany, all carrying the genetic signature that traces back to the Fertile Crescent. The people who carved stone pillars on a hilltop in Turkey 11,500 years ago are the ancestors of hundreds of millions of modern Europeans. The fourth piece of evidence reveals something unexpected about the genetic landscape of the early Fertile Crescent. It wasn't one population. It was many. The 2022 Lazaridis study revealed that the Fertile Crescent during the pre-pottery Neolithic contained at least 4 genetically distinct populations, each occupying different subregions. The Levantine populations, around Jericho and Ain Ghazal, were genetically different from the southeastern Anatolians near Göbekli Tepe. The Zagros mountain populations in modern-day Iran were different again. Agriculture was invented independently in at least 2 of these zones, the Levant and the Zagros. The people near Göbekli Tepe were part of the Anatolian cluster, which developed its own path to farming. 4 genetically distinct populations, living within a few hundred kilometers of each other, all independently transitioning to agriculture. The Neolithic Revolution wasn't a single event. It was a convergence. The 5th piece of evidence brings the archaeology and the genetics into alignment, because the stones confirm what the molecules suggest. Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. Karahan Tepe, discovered 12 kilometers away and partially excavated since 2019, contains similar T-shaped pillars, carved human heads, and ritual enclosures dating to the same period. At least a dozen related sites have been identified in the region. This wasn't one isolated temple. It was a regional tradition of monumental construction by interconnected communities of hunter-gatherers. The scale of coordination required to quarry, transport, and erect 10-ton pillars without draft animals or metal tools implies social organization, far beyond what the standard hunter-gatherer model predicted. But the DNA confirms they were hunter-gatherers genetically. No evidence of incoming advanced populations, no genetic break suggesting outside influence. Local people, local stone, local ambition on an unprecedented scale. 5 lines of evidence, all pointing the same direction. The builders were local, they were genetically unremarkable, and they became the ancestors of European civilization. But here is the twist. If the builders were ordinary hunter-gatherers, the mystery doesn't disappear. It deepens. The conspiracy theorists needed the builders to be extraordinary because they couldn't accept that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. DNA eliminated the who. It made the why more urgent. The traditional model said agriculture created surplus. Surplus enabled specialization. Specialization produced religion and monuments. Göbekli Tepe inverts the entire sequence. What if religion came first? What if the need to gather for ritual, to feed the builders, to coordinate labor? What if that need drove the adoption of agriculture rather than the other way around? This is the religion-first hypothesis. And while DNA can't prove causation, it eliminates the alternative explanations. No advanced outsiders, no missing civilization, just local hunter-gatherers who needed a temple before they needed a farm. The twist is that DNA didn't solve the mystery of Göbekli Tepe. It clarified the mystery by removing every easy answer. The who is settled. The why is the real frontier, and it may have permanently rearranged our understanding of how civilizations begin. The first case study concerns Göbekli Tepe's most puzzling feature. It was intentionally buried. Around 8000 BCE, after roughly 2,000 years of use, the builders backfilled the enclosures with rubble, soil, and animal bone. Deliberately, systematically, they buried their own temple. No one knows why. The backfilling is what preserved the site so perfectly. The burial protected the carvings from erosion, but the act itself implies a ritualistic relationship with the architecture that has no parallel. The backfill contained hundreds of thousands of animal bones, predominantly gazelle and aurochs, not domestic animals, wild game, hunted and consumed in massive feasting events spanning the site's active period. The second case study examines the people who used the site, because some of them left parts of themselves behind. In 2017, researchers published analysis of 3 human skull fragments from Göbekli Tepe, showing deliberate modification, deep incisions carved into the bone, evidence of cord attachment for suspension. The skulls had been displayed. Skull veneration is documented across multiple pre-pottery Neolithic sites. Plastered skulls at Jericho, skull caching at Temvi Edelsinkli Tek. Göbekli Tepe's skull cult connects it to a regional tradition of ancestor veneration or enemy display. The T-shaped pillars themselves may represent human figures, stylized bodies with arms and hands carved on their sides. If so, the builders were constructing a gathering of stone ancestors watching over the rituals. The third case study connects the stones to the seeds, because the earliest domesticated wheat was found within walking distance. Genetic analysis of modern wheat strains traces the domestication of einkorn wheat to the Karakata Mountains, roughly 30 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. The closest wild relatives of domesticated wheat grow on the same hills where the temple builders hunted. The timing overlaps, the geography overlaps, the population overlaps. The people who carved pillars at Göbekli Tepe lived among the wild ancestors of domesticated wheat, and their descendants were the ones who domesticated it. DNA confirms the population was continuous. Archaeology confirms the geographic proximity. Botany confirms the genetic origin of wheat. 3 independent disciplines converging on the same 30-kilometer radius. 3 case studies. A temple deliberately buried after 2,000 years. A skull cult that venerated or displayed the dead, and the birthplace of wheat growing in the shadow of the oldest temple on Earth. The molecules, the stones, and the seeds all tell the same story: ordinary people, extraordinary ambition, and a revolution that changed the world. So what does the DNA from the Göbekli Tepe region actually tell us? That the greatest architectural achievement of the ancient world was built by local hunter-gatherers, not Atlanteans. Not a lost, advanced civilization, people with flint tools, wild game, and a reason to build that we still don't fully understand. Their genetic legacy is staggering, from a hilltop in southeastern Turkey to every farming community that spread across Europe. Funsi carried their ancestry. Cheddar Man was partially replaced by their descendants. Modern Europeans carry 20 to 30% of their DNA. The stones they carved still stand. The wheat they would domesticate still feeds the world, and their DNA still flows in the veins of hundreds of millions of people who have never heard their name. They had no writing, no metal, no wheels, no pottery, and they built something that lasted 11,500 years. They didn't need a lost civilization. They needed a reason to gather. The temple came first, the farm came second, and that inversion, religion before agriculture, monument before village, belief before bread, may be the most important revision to human history in a generation. The plain below Göbekli Tepe is now farmland. The descendants of wild einkorn grow in ordered rows. The transition the builders began is still in progress. 11 millennia later, the evidence file is complete. 5 lines of investigation. Builders identified. Mystery deepened. The ladder of civilization permanently rearranged, and one hilltop in Turkey that proved human ambition has never needed permission from a textbook. The builders are gone. Their stones remain. Their genes persist in every European who descends from Anatolian farmers. And their question, why build before you farm, remains open. But Göbekli Tepe isn't the only ancient site where DNA demolished the story mainstream culture had told. Across the ancient world, from Britain to the Andes, genetic evidence is rewriting who built what, and what it means to be the descendants of builders. And the deeper researchers dig into the DNA of the Neolithic Revolution, the more the clean origin story of civilization fractures into something far more interesting. If hunter-gatherers built the oldest temple on Earth, what else did they build that we haven't found yet? Which hilltop hides the next Göbekli Tepe? Which buried enclosure is waiting for the next ground, penetrating radar survey? Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. The site may contain 20 times more monumental architecture than has been revealed. The story has barely begun. If this investigation changed what you thought you knew, subscribe. Every case in this series follows the same rule. Start with the textbook, follow the DNA, and let the molecules speak for themselves. Göbekli Tepe has been buried for 10,000 years. Its builder's DNA has been walking the earth the entire time. All sources and peer-reviewed references are linked in the description below. The question isn't who built Göbekli Tepe. We know that now. The question is what compelled them to carve 10-ton pillars before they'd planted a single seed. And that is a question the stones have been asking for 11,500 years. The DNA just confirmed who should be answering it.